right. Maria, the reason I initially had reached out to you as well was because of what is unfolding in Venezuela with the recent elections and Nicolas Maduro remaining in power. You're going to explain all of this at a high 30,000 foot overview, and then we're going to get kind of into the weeds here. I did want to ask you some things as well, talking to some Venezuelans that live here in Miami, and some of the protests that have happened here, not only in Miami and Orlando, and obviously we know that Florida is a big gateway to Latin America and South America. So I want to get into all of it. But first, I want to ask you, if you can, kind of explain for our audience that maybe is not familiar, they don't follow geopolitics, they don't understand what is happening in Venezuela right now. Like, what is the latest of what happened with the election process, and now the other party claiming that the election has been stolen, showing results proving that they have won this election? Can you kind of break it all down for us?
Okay, so on July 28th, Venezuelans went to the polls, and this was what was seen as their best chance to win against Maduro after so many years of an authoritarian government. And people went out en masse. And what quick counts, exit polls, and even studies show is that Edmundo Gonzalez, the opposition candidate, won. He kind of trounced Maduro, actually. It was 67% to Maduro's 30%. What has happened since then is that Maduro's a National Electoral Council declared him the winner of the election. And I mean, right after that, the country exploded into protest of people demanding transparency, because at the heart of all of this is that the government has not released any precinct level data as Venezuelan law stipulates. So what's going on right now is kind of like the opposition showing that they have the proof, showing that they have the tally sheets with these numbers, the government still refusing to release any data, and just initiating a crackdown that I had not seen in so many years. Like, the level of fear that is swirling around Venezuela is unprecedented. I mean, 23 people have already been killed in these protests. There's almost 2,000 people that have been imprisoned or arbitrarily detained. So that's where we are right now. And the international community is kind of initiating these efforts to see if they can reach some negotiation with Maduro.
You can kind of hear it in Maria's voice there. If you don't, yeah, like I was mentioning before, you are Venezuelan, so I can tell that this is personal to you. And a couple years ago, when Nick and I did an episode of what's happening in Cuba with the protests that happened there against the President Diaz, that's personal to me as somebody whose dad left Cuba in 1960. So I want to make some parallels to American politics. But first, I want to ask you, just you as a human being, as a person who's Venezuelan, as somebody, for me, who worked here in Miami at HBO Latin America, and in 2013, when Chavez passed away, and we were moving our offices from Caracas to, Bogota and Colombia, I saw many people that look like you, Maria, to be honest, very emotional about this. And I saw Maduro kind of promise that he would be different. We're going to get into how he has not been different. He has been more of the same with Chavez. But I remember the emotions of my friends there working at HBO Latin America, and my best friend who's Venezuelan, who was born in Venezuela. So, like, for you, just on a personal level, like, how are you feeling with all this? How is your family feeling with all this? And do you have any family in Venezuela right now, that how are they doing with this?
I do have family back home, and I think, I mean, this is a reality for most, if not all, of the country. When you have an exodus of 8 million people, that's a quarter of the population. Families have people all over the world. And that's why this campaign felt not only like a political thing or a fight about policies, it felt like the last chance people had to have their families reunited. And I've talked to a lot of Venezuelan immigrants here in the US who, they had to most move through 8 countries, mostly by foot. Like, they didn't come here easily. And they risked their lives to come here. And them telling me, like, if Edmundo and Maria Corina win, I'm going back. You know, as a journalist, anytime there is a threat against democracy or these things happen, that's part of the job. That's shining a light is like the most important thing that journalism can do. But as a Venezuelan, like this just it's heartbreaking because you're here and you're looking at what's happening in your country and you feel kind of like this helplessness of not being able to do anything and just watching stuff happen.
Yeah. I like I said, I can hear it in your voice and stuff like that. And I made fun of Van Jones for crying on TV, so we're gonna try our hardest not to cry on this podcast.
No.
But I did want to play something for you though, because you were talking about the world stage and the international community. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said something recently about what is happening in Venezuela. And we know the State Department and some other agencies of the US have all said that they believe that the election was won by the opposition party and Maduro did lose. But I want to play what the Secretary of State said, and we're going to react on the other side. So take a listen to this.
I want to speak quickly to the elections that just took place in Venezuela. We applaud the Venezuelan people for their participation in the July 28th presidential election. We commend their courage and commitment to democracy in the face of repression and in the face of adversity. We've seen the announcement just a short while ago by the Venezuelan Electoral Commission. We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. It's critical that every vote be counted fairly and transparently, that election officials immediately share information with the opposition and independent observers without delay, and that the electoral authorities publish the detailed tabulation of votes. The international community is watching this very closely and will respond accordingly.
And will respond accordingly. So I want to ask you on that front because, again, one of the highest officials here in the US, and I don't know if the Biden administration has actually, at least President Biden himself, commented on what's happening in Venezuela. You can correct me if that's happened, but a statement like that, a strong US statement saying that, we don't, the international stage is watching and we don't believe the results that Maduro's party is saying in terms of what happened here. Does it move the needle? Like what can actually be done here besides the US's involvement, as we've seen in other governments and coups? But like in a realistic sense, does it move the needle in the international community? What does it do?
I think that the involvement of the international community in all of this might pressure Maduro, but at the end of the day, this is something that's, if he leaves power, it is something that is going to come in the hands of the Venezuelan people. There's so many scenarios of where things could be headed, right? Like at this point, the country's sort of taking the lead with having an open channel of communication with Maduro, are Brazil, Mexico, Chile too, and Colombia, can't forget Colombia, which are more leftist governments. But like, I think it's gotten to a point where it's like, we can't defend you if you're not willing to provide these voting tallies. And I think it's important to explain why the voting tallies are kind of like at the center of all of this, right? Because Venezuela has a pretty high-tech electoral system. You vote by a machine, right? And there's different voting centers spread across the country, and each voting center has a determined amount of machines. It can be one, it can be two, three. And you vote, you click on the screen, and after you vote, there's like this little tiny paper ballot that they give you with your vote, and you put it inside a box. Once the voting centers close, there's the machine tabulates the whole thing. And it gives you kind of like this huge receipt. I don't know if you've seen them in pictures. It's kind of like these long sheets of papers. We call them actas, which have the vote count for every single candidate. And those results are compared with a little ballots that you put into a box to confirm that the numbers match. And then what we call testigos, the poll watchers, the witnesses for each party, look at the results, and then they sign the pieces of paper. What's happened in other elections is that Maduro has been accused of different levels of fraud. I mean, there's been incidents where, they go to low-income communities and they offer them bags of food, or they put them inside of a bus and remind them that they have housing because of the government. And so they're strongly encouraged to go vote. Or maybe there's been accusations that they might have like changed numbers a little bit here and a little bit there, but there's never been actual proof of that. There's no real way to prove the fraud. And the opposition, like throughout this last month, they established a really complex and sophisticated operation where they realized we need to have proof. So they trained volunteers and poll watchers that were credited by the government to be there. And when it came to the election night, those people stayed until 1, 2, 3 a.m. fighting to get that voting tally. And then they had like these different points throughout the city where those tallies were scanned and uploaded to this webpage that anyone can check out. And it shows you not only like the tally that was scanned, but also the numbers for like the states and each voting center. And that is how they came up with the number that Edmundo won with 67% of the vote. We did a whole story and an investigation into this. And, we had a reporter who was in Caracas and she went to one of these like these secret stations. And she saw the tallies that were there and compared them with those online and saw that they matched. We talked to poll watchers who were there in the night and, saw the results. I mean, the only reason why we can't completely verify that they're true is that the government has not released any sort of data. They just gave out the results that the electoral council president literally wrote in a tiny piece of a napkin and read from. So we can't compare what the government has with what the opposition has because there's just no transparency.
I mean, yeah, I don't even know how to follow up on something like that that is so horrific, but could come to these shores. So maybe I can transition this way because, and I'm probably going to make a couple people that listen to this podcast upset, but the biggest thing that I've noticed, and again, I'm here in Miami, a lot of Venezuelans down here, Colombians, South Americans. Obviously, I've mentioned this is the gateway, but also this is the gateway for people that have fled countries in peril, specifically Cuba and Venezuela, to be specific, because of the communities that are based down here. And so, what I'm noticing now, Maria, is that there's this parallel of, and I can draw a through line through it. It's these Trump supporters that are posting about what is happening in Venezuela, not cognizant or having any self awareness to what just took place in Venezuela is something that the former candidate, who's now at the top of the Republican ticket, tried to do in 2021. Forget about whether or not January 6th was a peaceful protest that turned into, something that was violent. It doesn't matter about that. It matters about what you just said, that there was a dispute of something that they felt was stolen, but it was not stolen. So there's the different people and influencers making these parallels to the Trump part of this and Maduro part of this. And am I wrong in the assessment of, and again, Maduro is completely different, and you can get a little bit more into his regime over these last 11 years. And the people that you just mentioned, 23 or 24 folks have died in these protests so far. Do you see any parallels or synergies with respect to what is happening right now in Venezuela and what happened in 2021 with the former president?
So, it's been kind of interesting to see how Venezuela is discussed by non-Venezuelans or by people abroad. Because from both sides, from the left and from the right, they try to paint this as kind of like a fight between progressive or conservative and the left and the right. And in Venezuela, that's just not the case. Like this is not about left or right. It's become a situation where it's about like liberty versus dictatorship, right? So the context is a little different. And I there are some similarities, but I will say this. I think you have to look back at what happened in Venezuela. We were the richest country in Latin America for a while. We had these institutions. We had, so much. We were the country that received immigrants at some point. And, all these companies had their headquarters in Venezuela because the country was great. What happened? We also had a two-party system, COPE and Acción Democrática, that roughly similar to Republican and the Democratic Party. But some people felt left behind. Some people felt that inequality was rising, and the politicians in these parties were not taking care of them. And that's how Chavez takes advantage of the situation and gets into power, because he specifically caters to these people and tells them these elites are not, they don't care about you. I will take care about you. Um, and then after that, he destroyed the Venezuelan political system, and just the country's institutions in general. I mean, the first thing he did was pack the courts with supporters. He was able to change the constitution. He gave himself power, basically, like all the power is now entrenched in the executive. There's no checks and balances. He went after the press and said that they were all liars. Eh, he basically created the situation where it was us versus them, right? It was like these elites that don't care about you, they're the enemy. Um, they don't care about you. I do. And that's how he was able to get so much support. He was very lucky because the oil prices shot up during his government. And then after he died, the oil prices went down. And so Maduro was stuck with this economic situation that had been building up for decades. The thing with Chavez is that, yes, there were some human rights violations, but he didn't have to be as authoritarian in that sense, like use repression as much as Maduro has had to over the past years. I mean, we're talking about thousands of people and thousands of political prisoners. And we're talking about a government now that has been accused of crimes against humanity.
Yeah, it's a good summation there for people that, and I encourage people to kind of find out more about this situation overall. But I did want to ask you to put a bow on it. Like, where do we go from here? Because a lot of the times, with these episodes, obviously the information is going to change. When people listen to this, maybe in the future. So, right now, you gave a summation of what happened from the election process. We played Anthony Blinken's, but now where do we go from here? Like, is this just it? Is it just over? I've seen a lot of things on social media saying, "Hey, don't let us die here." Like, we are protesting in the streets every day because we want this to change, but it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight for this. Like, where do we go from here, Maria?
I feel like we can speculate every day and things might change. I mean, I remember in 2019 that everyone was like, this is it, we got it. And then we went back to Maduro and it was like as if nothing happened. But I think that, I mean, I just feel like it's very difficult to go back to the situation that you were in. Um, I mean, when you look at the places where Edmundo González won, these were Chavista strongholds. We're talking about a place like 23 de Enero, which is a low-income community in Venezuela where they have a ton of like missions and government housing, and you have Chavez's eyes plastered everywhere in buildings, and you have Maduro's face, and Edmundo González won there according to the tally sheets they've compiled. So I think like they've lost their base, and that's why the only way to sort of keep things or try to keep things in control has been to repress and go into these communities and pull people out of their houses because they were poll watchers or because they went to a protest. Um, it's really, I mean, things change so much in Venezuela that you might speculate all day about what might happen. But right now, it looks like the opposition is focusing its efforts on trying to break or create a gap in the military. They're the ones who are basically Maduro's force, right? They're the ones that are carrying out all of this repression. So I think their thinking is that if they're able to create this break in the military, that might help. It's also worth noting that, in Venezuela, the people who are in the voting centers and who, compile the actas too, and um, it's called Plan Republic, and it's conducted by the military, so they know the results. Um, I think that's where they're heading. I think there's also hope that with the international community something might come out of it. I mean, Maduro right now, he's basically isolating himself. I mean, we might have a situation where it becomes a bit like Nicaragua, where you become a global pariah and you just entrench the whole country. But I do think too that there's another added level of pressure for the world here because, like I've said, it's already 8 million people that have fled Venezuela. Thousands are here in the US. A lot of them are in Colombia, in Peru, and in all these different countries. We're everywhere. I mean, I was in South Bend, Indiana, and there were over 1,000 Venezuelans there, and there were two Venezuelan restaurants. And this is South Bend, Indiana. And a lot of people have been already thinking of leaving the country. So you might have another wave of immigration. So, I mean, if you're one of the countries that's saying that you can't take in more people and that you have problems in the border, you might care about this.
Listen, we have a joke down here in Weston, Florida, down here. That's Westonzuela because of how many people live that came here from Venezuela. So, I'm so thankful for you, Maria, for kind of breaking down everything that's happening in Venezuela. And like I said, without doing the Van Jones and moving to emotion, because I know it is truly emotional. And like I said, I still have family in Cuba on my dad's side. And so I know, and my wife as well, that is Cuban. Like I know the struggles maybe to a different extent. So I feel for you guys and for all my Venezuelan friends out there from not only HBO Latin American Days, but here in Miami as well that are going through it, that still have family and friends that live in Venezuela. You can check out all of Maria's work over at thewashingtonpost.com. Maria, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program today. Continued success to you. Please stay safe.
Thank you.